We make promises all the time. Everything from a simple, I'll call you later, to signing a huge multi-million-dollar deal. But have you ever stopped to think about what that invisible line is? The one that turns a casual promise into something the law will actually back up? Well, it's not about dusty old legal books. It's a story full of drama and some surprisingly human moments.
We all do it, right? Sometimes dozens of times a day without even thinking. But that single click, that's the modern-day handshake. It's a digital signature built on centuries of real-world legal fights. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and trace the history behind that click to figure out what truly makes a promise stick.
Okay, so at its very core, a contract is just a promise with legal muscle behind it. Simple enough. But what forges that muscle? What gives a few words the full power of the law? That's the life cycle we're about to dive into. Every single contract starts with a spark. It's that moment when one person makes an offer and another person says yes and accepts it. Sounds pretty straightforward, doesn't it? But as you're about to see, this simple little dance can get surprisingly complicated.
So let's jump in a time machine and go back to 1893. The Carbolic Smoke Ball Company puts out this ad with an incredible claim. And to prove they were serious, I mean really serious, they even put 1,000 pounds in the bank, which was a fortune back then. So along comes Mrs. Carlisle. She buys the smoke ball, she uses it exactly like they told her to, and yep, you guessed it, she gets the flu. So she goes to claim her 100-pound reward, and the company basically tells her, oh, sorry, that was just marketing fluff, not a real offer. But Mrs. Carlisle wasn't having it. She took them to court. And the court's decision here was an absolute game changer. First, it established that, yes, an advertisement can be a real binding offer to the entire world. Second, and this is huge, you don't have to formally write a letter saying, I accept. Sometimes your actions, like actually using the smoke ball, are your acceptance. And that bank deposit, that was the nail in the coffin. It proved this was a serious promise. But what happens when acceptance isn't instant? Back in 1818, without phones or email, this was a massive problem. So check this out. An offer to sell wool is mailed out. The buyer gets it on September 5th and immediately mails back their acceptance. But on September 8th, the seller, having heard nothing, just sells the wool to somebody else. And then, the very next day, the acceptance letter finally arrives. So when was the deal made? The court had to decide, and the answer was the moment the acceptance was mailed. This postal rule became absolutely essential for doing business over long distances. So we've got an offer, we've got an acceptance, we're done, right? Well, not quite. We need one more key ingredient: consideration. The easiest way to think about it is as the price of the promise. It's the bargain. If I promise to give you my car and you promise me nothing in return, that's just a gift, not a contract. But if you promise me $5,000 for it, now we both have something on the line. That's consideration. Now, if consideration is the price, who has to pay it? This is where things get really fascinating and where you see different legal systems go in totally different directions. In England, a son couldn't enforce a promise made for his benefit because, well, he hadn't personally paid the price. But in India, an aunt in a very similar situation could sue. So what's going on here? The difference boils down to one critical detail. English law is very strict. It says the price for the promise has to come directly from the person trying to enforce it. But Indian law is much more flexible. It says the price can come from the person getting the promise or, and this is key, from any other person. It's a small change in wording, but it dramatically changes who can hold someone to their word. Okay, so a contract is born, it's valid, but what happens when the world throws a massive curveball? Something totally unexpected that makes the promise impossible to keep. This is where we get to the end of a contract's life, the doctrine of frustration. I want you to imagine this. You've booked a music hall for a massive concert series. The tickets are all sold, the band is ready, and then disaster. Through no one's fault, the entire venue burns to the ground. The concert promoter sued the owner, saying, hey, we had a deal. But how can you possibly have a concert in a hall that doesn't exist anymore? And the court's decision was just plain common sense. It said the contract was frustrated. The very thing the agreement was about, the music hall, was gone. It's a legal way of saying the entire basis of the deal has gone up in smoke, literally. So, since it was impossible to perform the promise, the law just declared the contract dead, and both parties got to walk away. But this idea goes beyond just physical destruction. What if the whole point of the contract disappears? There's this famous case where a guy rented a flat for the sole purpose of watching King Edward VII's coronation parade. But then the king got sick, and the coronation was postponed. The renter refused to pay. The court created this brilliant three-step test you see here. What was the foundation of the deal? To see the parade. Did both people know this? Yep. Was that foundation destroyed? Absolutely. The parade was canceled. So the contract was frustrated. The goal was never just to rent a room. It was to see a king, and the king wasn't coming.
So far, we've been talking about promises that were valid at some point. But some promises are invalid from the second they're made. This happens when one of the people involved doesn't have the legal capacity to make a binding agreement in the first place. This landmark case from India really drives this point home. A minor, Dharmadas Ghosh, was talked into mortgaging his property to get a loan. Later, when the lender tried to enforce the deal, the young man's defense was simple. I was a minor. This contract shouldn't count. The Privy Council, which was the highest court at the time, made a statement that was incredibly powerful and couldn't be misunderstood. Not just cancelable, not just voidable, absolutely void. And the consequences of this are huge. It means an agreement with a minor isn't just breakable. In the eyes of the law, it never even existed. That means the minor can't be forced to repay any money they received. The law made a very clear choice here. The absolute protection of minors is more important than anything else. Wow! We've traced the entire life of a promise, from that first spark all the way to its potential end. But how does this history of smoke balls and canceled coronations have anything to do with our digital lives today? Well, the next time you're about to download an app or buy something online and you see that little button, just pause for a second. Remember that the legal force behind that one simple click was forged in these real human stories. The story of a woman who took an ad at its word, a promoter whose venue vanished in flames, and a king who got too sick for his own parade. That click isn't just a click. It's the end result of centuries of people trying to figure out what it means to keep a promise. And it really makes you think, doesn't it? Our lives are built on this incredible web of agreements, big and small. Understanding what gives them weight is understanding how our world actually works. So, after all that, what promises will you make today?